Welcome to Monk's Temple. Find a quiet space within yourself, a place where the world's demands cannot reach for just this little while. Allow your body to settle, your breath to find its own natural rhythm, and your mind to begin the gentle process of arriving fully in this present moment. There is nothing you need to fix right now, nothing you need to solve, nowhere you need to be other than exactly where you are, exactly as you are. We gather today to explore a teaching that emerges from the heart of Buddhist wisdom yet speaks directly to the most pressing questions of our modern psychological experience. The Buddha, that ancient and profound explorer of consciousness, made a discovery that changed human history. He discovered that the source of our deepest suffering is not the pain life brings us, but the war we wage against ourselves in response to that pain. Consider for a moment how you speak to yourself when things go wrong. When you make a mistake at work, when you say something you regret, when you fall back into a habit you thought you had conquered, what is the inner voice that responds? For most of us, that voice is harsh, critical, unforgiving. It tells us we should have known better. It reminds us of our failures. This voice believes it is helping. It believes that by being hard on us, it will motivate us to improve, to try harder, to become better. But the Buddha's radical insight was that this voice is not helping at all. It is the very engine of our suffering. It is the second arrow, the one we shoot into our own wound after life has already shot the first. The first arrow is inevitable. Loss will come. Disappointment will visit. Illness will arrive. These are the unavoidable truths of human existence. But the second arrow, the arrow of self-blame, of self-rejection, of inner warfare, this arrow is entirely optional. And it is this second arrow that prevents the first wound from ever truly healing. Let me share with you a story that illuminates this truth. In a bustling modern city, there lived a man named Daniel who was a highly successful architect. He had designed buildings that won international awards, yet despite his external success, Daniel lived with constant inner torment. Every project he completed was immediately followed by waves of self-criticism. He would lie awake at night replaying conversations, second-guessing decisions, convinced that any moment everyone would discover he was a fraud. Daniel tried everything to silence this inner critic. He read books on confidence. He attended workshops on self-esteem. He stood before his mirror every morning declaring his worth and talent. But the voice would not be silenced. It grew quieter for a time, perhaps, but it always returned, often stronger than before. One day, exhausted from this lifelong battle, Daniel traveled to a remote coastal village to clear his mind. He walked along the rocky shore, watching waves crash against ancient stones. He noticed an old man sitting on a large rock, fishing with a simple pole, his face weathered but peaceful, his eyes carrying a depth of calm that Daniel had never seen. Something drew him to sit nearby. For a long time, they sat in silence. Finally, the old man spoke without looking at him. "You are fighting someone who lives in your own head." Daniel was startled. "How did you know?" The old man smiled gently. "I can see it in your posture. You are carrying a heavy burden. But it is not a burden of the world. It is a burden of the mind. You are at war with yourself, and in that war, there can be no victor, only endless casualties." Daniel found himself pouring out his story, the constant self-criticism, the exhausting inner battles, the desperate attempts to fix himself. When he finished, the old man pointed to the ocean. "Look at the waves. Do you see how they rise and fall? Does the ocean fight its waves? Does it try to stop the powerful ones and encourage the gentle ones? Daniel shook his head slowly. The ocean does not fight its own nature. It allows all waves to arise and to pass away. It holds them all, the powerful and the gentle. The ocean's vastness is not diminished by any wave, nor is it enhanced. The waves are simply expressions of the ocean's nature, coming and going within its infinite depths. You have spent your life trying to fight certain waves, but you cannot fight a wave. You can only watch it rise and fall. The problem is not the waves. The problem is that you have forgotten you are the ocean. This is the essence of what the Buddha taught. We spend our lives identifying with the waves, believing that we are our thoughts, our feelings, our self-criticisms. We believe that the harsh inner voice is who we are. But the Buddha invited us to recognize that we are not the waves. We are the ocean. We are the vast, open, aware space in which all thoughts and feelings arise and pass away. When you know yourself as the ocean, the waves no longer threaten you. This is the beginning of self-acceptance. It is not about liking all your thoughts. It is about recognizing that you are the space in which all of this arises, and that space itself is already whole, already complete, already at peace. Let us continue our time together at Monk's Temple. Breathe gently, allowing the story from our first session to settle within you like sediment in a clear pond. The image of the ocean and its waves, the understanding that you are the vast awareness and not the passing thoughts, this is a truth that requires not just hearing, but repeated gentle remembrance. The Buddha often spoke of something he called the nature of mind. He described it as being like a clear mountain lake, pristine and undisturbed. But most of us, he observed, never see the lake. We only see the surface, churned by winds, reflecting distorted images, appearing murky and turbulent. We forget that beneath the waves and the ripples, the water itself remains clear, remains pure, remains untouched by whatever occurs on the surface. This forgetting is the root of our suffering. And the path the Buddha laid out is simply the path of remembering. It is not about acquiring something new. It is about recovering something ancient, something that has been true about you from the very beginning. Let me tell you a story about remembering. There was once a woman named Maya who worked as a curator in a great museum. Her specialty was restoring old paintings, bringing them back to their original glory. She had a gift for seeing beneath layers of dirt and discolored varnish, for discerning the true colors and forms that time had obscured. She could spend months on a single painting, patiently removing centuries of accumulation, revealing the masterpiece beneath. One day, the museum acquired a painting that was in terrible condition. It was dark, almost black, with cracks running through the surface. The previous owners had stored it in a damp basement for decades. Most people who saw it assumed it was beyond saving, a lost cause not worth the effort. But Maya felt drawn to it. Something in its composition, even beneath the grime, spoke to her. She began her work. Day after day, week after week, she would sit before the painting with her tools, gently cleaning small sections at a time. It was tedious, painstaking work. She could only reveal a square inch at a time, and often she would work for hours and see almost no visible difference. But she persisted. She trusted that beneath the darkness, something beautiful was waiting to be revealed. Months passed. Other curators would walk by and shake their heads, wondering why she was wasting her time. But Maya continued, driven by a faith she could not explain. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the painting began to emerge. A patch of blue sky here. The hint of a golden robe there. The faint outline of a face looking out from centuries past. After nearly a year of work, the painting was fully restored. It was breathtaking. A luminous scene of a figure seated in meditation, surrounded by golden light, radiating a peace so profound that visitors to the museum would stand before it in silence, tears streaming down their faces. The painting had always been there, hidden beneath the darkness. It had never lost its beauty. It had only been covered over. Maya stood before the finished work and understood something deeply. She realized that this was not just a story about a painting. It was a story about every human being. We come into this world as luminous masterpieces, whole and complete. But life layers upon us its grime. The expectations of others, the wounds of the past, the voices of criticism, the stories of unworthiness, all of these accumulate like layers of dark varnish, hiding our true nature from ourselves. We come to believe that we are the grime, the cracks, the damaged surface. We forget that beneath it all, the masterpiece remains untouched. The Buddha's teaching is the gentle work of restoration. It is not about painting a new picture of ourselves, a more attractive self-image that we try to become. It is about the patient, loving work of removing what is not us, revealing the luminous awareness that has always been our true nature. This is self-acceptance. It is not accepting the grime as who we are. It is seeing through the grime to the masterpiece beneath, and knowing that the grime never touched the painting itself. Think of your own life. Consider the layers that have accumulated over your true nature. The voices that told you that you were not enough. The experiences that convinced you that you were broken. The failures that seemed to define you. These are the layers of varnish, not the painting itself. They have covered your beauty, but they have not destroyed it. They cannot destroy it, because your true nature, the awareness that you are, is indestructible. The practice of mindfulness that the Buddha taught is simply the practice of gently cleaning one small section at a time. We sit in meditation, and we observe our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations. We notice the layers. We see the grime of self-judgment, the discoloration of fear, the cracks of old wounds. And we do not try to paint over them. We do not try to create a new, improved version of ourselves. We simply, gently, lovingly, allow them to be seen. And in the light of awareness, they begin to dissolve. Not because we fought them, but because we finally brought them into the light. This is the paradox at the heart of transformation. The less you try to change yourself, the more you actually transform. When you stop fighting the layers and simply hold them in awareness, they lose their power. They are revealed for what they are, temporary accumulations on the surface of an eternal masterpiece. And what remains is not a new self, but the self that has always been there, luminous, peaceful, and complete. Let your breath be your anchor, drawing you gently into the present moment. Allow the stories we have shared, the ocean and the waves, the painting and its restoration, to settle deep within your consciousness. Today we explore a truth that may initially seem challenging, yet holds the key to profound freedom. The Buddha observed that human beings have a peculiar habit. We spend our lives building walls. We construct fortresses of identity, carefully curated images of who we think we are, who we think we should be. And then we spend the rest of our lives defending these fortresses against anything that might threaten them. We defend against criticism, against failure, against the opinions of others, against any experience that might reveal that our carefully constructed self is not as solid as we pretend. But the Buddha's invitation was radically different. He invited us to step outside the fortress. He invited us to see that the walls we have built are not protecting us. They are imprisoning us. They cut us off from the full experience of life, from authentic connection with others, from the raw and beautiful truth of our own being. Let me share with you a story that illuminates this teaching. In a small village, there lived a potter named Elena. She was known throughout the region for her exquisite ceramics, bowls and vases of such delicate beauty that people collected them as treasures. But Elena had a secret. She was deeply ashamed of her own work. She would spend weeks on a single piece, and the moment it was finished, she would see only its flaws. A slight asymmetry here, a tiny crack there, a glaze that was not perfectly uniform. She would look at her creations and feel only disappointment. One day, a wealthy collector came to her workshop. He had heard of her reputation and wanted to purchase one of her pieces for his collection. Elena nervously showed him her latest work, a beautiful vase with a subtle, graceful curve. The collector examined it carefully, turning it in his hands. Then he noticed something. A tiny imperfection in the glaze, a spot where the color was slightly darker than the rest. He pointed to it and asked, "What is this?" Elena's heart sank. She began to apologize, explaining how she had tried to fix it, how she considered the vase a failure, how she would be happy to start again and make him a perfect one. But the collector held up his hand to stop her. He smiled warmly and said, "This is the most beautiful part of the entire vase." Elena was confused. How can imperfection be beautiful? The collector sat down and invited her to do the same. He told her a story from his own life. "When I was a young man," he began, "I was obsessed with perfection. I wanted everything in my life to be flawless. My home, my work, my relationships, my own character. I drove myself relentlessly, and I drove everyone around me equally crazy. I was never satisfied, always finding something to criticize, always believing that just a little more effort would finally yield the perfect life I dreamed of." He paused, looking at the vase. But life has a way of teaching us what we refuse to learn. I fell seriously ill. For months, I was bedridden, unable to do anything, unable to control anything, unable to perfect anything. In that stillness, something shifted. I began to notice the small things. The way light moved across my ceiling. The sound of rain against the window. The kindness of a nurse who brought me tea. None of these things were perfect. The light had shadows. The rain was messy. The nurse was tired and sometimes forgot things. But in my stillness, I saw that they were beautiful exactly as they were. He handed the vase back to Elena. "This imperfection you see, this tiny variation in the glaze, it tells a story. It says that this vase was made by human hands, not a machine. It says that in the firing, something unique occurred, something that will never occur in exactly the same way again. It makes this vase not a copy of an ideal, but an original, irreplaceable expression of life. The perfection you were seeking would have made it lifeless. This flaw makes it real." The Buddha taught something very similar. He observed that our pursuit of perfection, our endless striving to become an idealized version of ourselves, is a primary source of suffering. Why? Because the idealized self does not exist. It is a fantasy, a ghost we chase that always recedes into the future. We tell ourselves, I will be happy when I am more patient, more successful, more confident, more loved. But that future self never arrives, because the conditions for its arrival are always just out of reach. True peace, the Buddha discovered, is not found in becoming perfect. It is found in becoming real. It is found in accepting ourselves exactly as we are, imperfections and all, and discovering that these imperfections are not obstacles to our worth. They are the very texture of our humanity. They are what make us real, what make us relatable, what make us capable of genuine connection with others. Consider your own imperfections, the ones you work so hard to hide. What if they are not your shame but your signature? What if the very thing you most dislike about yourself is the thing that makes you uniquely you? The impatience that also gives you energy. The sensitivity that also gives you depth. The fear that also keeps you safe. These are not flaws to be eradicated. They are facets of your being to be understood, to be integrated, to be accepted. When you stop fighting your imperfections, you stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, you free up enormous energy that was previously consumed by the war. This energy becomes available for living, for loving, for creating, for growing in ways that are organic and authentic rather than forced and fearful. This is the paradox of the potter's vase. In accepting the flaw, the vase becomes more valuable, not less. In accepting yourself, you become more alive, not less. Settle into your breathing, allowing each exhale to release a little more tension, each inhale to invite a little more presence. We have been exploring the profound shift from self-rejection to self-acceptance, from fighting ourselves to embracing ourselves. Today we encounter one of the most misunderstood and yet most liberating teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha spoke of something called anatta, often translated as no self or non-self. This teaching has confused many people, leading some to believe that Buddhism denies the existence of the individual altogether. But this is a misunderstanding. The Buddha was not saying that you do not exist. He was pointing to something far more subtle and far more freeing. He was saying that the self you take yourself to be, the fixed, solid, permanent identity you believe you are, this self does not exist as a thing. It is a process. It is a verb, not a noun. Let me illustrate this with a story. In a large city, there lived a musician named Samuel who played the cello in a symphony orchestra. He had played the cello since childhood, and over the decades, his identity had become completely intertwined with his instrument. He was Samuel the cellist. It was who he was. When people asked him to describe himself, that was always the first thing he said. One evening, during a performance of a particularly demanding piece, Samuel's cello was damaged. A crack appeared in its wooden body, a serious fracture that would require months of repair. Samuel was devastated. Without his cello, he felt like he had lost a part of himself. He stopped leaving his apartment. He stopped answering calls from friends. He fell into a deep depression, convinced that without his instrument, he was nothing. Weeks passed. One day, a knock came at his door. It was an elderly woman who lived in his building, a woman he barely knew. She held a simple wooden flute in her hands. "I hear you are a musician," she said gently. "I am not very good at this, and I wonder if you might teach me a little." Samuel almost refused. He was a cellist, not a flutist. But something in the woman's eyes, a kindness, a vulnerability, moved him. He invited her in. He took the flute in his hands, an instrument he had not touched since childhood. He blew a note, then another. It was clumsy, awkward, nothing like the rich tones he could draw from his cello. But it was something. It was music. Over the following weeks, Samuel and the elderly woman met regularly. He taught her what he remembered of the flute, and in return, she listened to his stories, his fears, his grief over his lost cello and his lost identity. And slowly, something shifted in Samuel. He began to realize that he was not his cello. He was not even the music he made. He was the awareness that could make music on any instrument, or on no instrument at all. He was the consciousness that could appreciate music, that could teach music, that could simply sit in silence and still feel alive. When his cello was finally repaired, Samuel returned to the orchestra. But he returned changed. He still played beautifully, perhaps more beautifully than before, but he no longer believed he was his cello. He no longer believed he was even the cellist. He understood now that these were roles he played, identities he temporarily inhabited, but they were not the totality of who he was. Beneath all roles, beneath all identities, there was simply awareness, simply presence, simply the vast open space of being itself. This is what the Buddha meant by anatta. The self you take to be solid and permanent is actually a collection of ever-changing elements. Your body changes constantly. Your thoughts arise and pass away. Your feelings shift from moment to moment. Your roles and identities change throughout your life. Which of these is the real you? The child you once were? The teenager with different dreams? The adult with different concerns? They are all you, and none of them fully capture you. The freedom the Buddha discovered comes from no longer clinging to any fixed identity. When you stop believing you are your anger, you are no longer controlled by your anger. When you stop believing you are your fear, you are no longer paralyzed by your fear. When you stop believing you are your failures, you are no longer defined by your failures. You become free to experience all of these states without being imprisoned by any of them. Consider your own life. What identities do you cling to? I am a successful person. I am a failure. I am an anxious person. I am a strong person. I am a victim. I am a helper. Each of these identities feels real, feels solid, feels like the truth of who you are. But the Buddha invites you to look more closely. Are you always successful? Are you always a failure? Are you anxious in every moment? Are you strong in every situation? Of course not. These are passing states, temporary weather patterns in the sky of your awareness. They are not you. They are just visitors. When you can see your identities as visitors rather than as your permanent residents, a tremendous lightness enters your life. You no longer have to defend these identities. You no longer have to prove you are successful. You no longer have to hide that you are struggling. You can simply be what you are in this moment, knowing that this moment will pass and a new one will arise. This is self-acceptance at its deepest level. It is not accepting a fixed self with all its flaws. It is accepting that you have no fixed self to defend. It is accepting that you are free. Allow your awareness to rest gently on your breath, that simple rhythm that connects you to the present moment. We have been journeying together through profound teachings, the ocean and its waves, the restoration of the masterpiece, the beauty of imperfection, the freedom of no fixed identity. Today we explore a truth that lies at the very heart of the Buddha's awakening. The story is told that on the night of his enlightenment, the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and made a powerful vow. He would not rise from that spot until he had penetrated the deepest mysteries of existence. As he sat in deep meditation, he faced his greatest challenge. The forces of temptation and fear arose to disturb his peace. They came as seductive visions, as terrifying demons, as doubts and distractions of every kind. And the Buddha did something remarkable. He did not fight them. He did not run from them. He simply acknowledged them and invited them to stay. This is one of the most radical teachings in all of spiritual literature. When faced with what we most fear, what we most want to avoid, the Buddha's response was not resistance but invitation. He said, "I see you. I know you. You cannot harm me." And in that moment of complete acceptance, the forces lost their power and dissolved. Let me share with you a modern story that carries the same wisdom. There was a woman named Catherine who had spent 20 years battling anxiety. Her anxiety was not mild. It was a constant companion, a voice that whispered worst-case scenarios, a physical sensation of dread that lived in her chest like a permanent resident. She had tried everything. Therapy, medication, meditation, exercise, special diets. Sometimes these things helped for a while, but the anxiety always returned, often stronger than before. One day, Catherine was sitting in her therapist's office, describing yet another week of struggle. She was exhausted. She told her therapist, "I don't think I can keep fighting this anymore. I have no strength left. I give up." Her therapist, a wise woman who had walked this path herself, leaned forward and said something Catherine never expected. "Good," she said. "Then stop fighting. Give up. Stop trying to make the anxiety go away. Stop treating it like an enemy to be defeated. Invite it to stay." Catherine was shocked. "What do you mean? It's the thing ruining my life. Why would I invite it to stay?" The therapist explained. "You have spent 20 years telling your anxiety that it is not welcome. You have tried to evict it, to kill it, to lock it in the basement. And what has happened? It has only grown stronger. It demands your attention. It refuses to leave. Why? Because what we resist persists. What we fight, we feed. Your anxiety is not your enemy. It is a part of you that has been trying to get your attention, trying to tell you something, trying to protect you in its own misguided way. When you stop fighting it, you can finally listen to it." Catherine left the session confused but intrigued. That night, when the familiar wave of anxiety arose in her chest, she did something completely new. Instead of tensing against it, instead of trying to distract herself, instead of reaching for her coping mechanisms, she simply sat still. She closed her eyes and turned her attention toward the anxiety. She breathed into it. She said silently, "I feel you. I am here. Tell me what you need." At first, nothing happened. The anxiety remained. But Catherine stayed with it. She noticed the tightness in her chest, the shallowness of her breath, the racing thoughts. She did not judge any of it. She just observed. And then something shifted. The tightness began to loosen, just slightly. The thoughts slowed, just a little. Catherine realized that for the first time in 20 years, she was not afraid of her anxiety. She was simply present with it. This was the beginning of Catherine's healing. Not the end of anxiety, but the end of her war with anxiety. She learned that the real problem was not the anxious feelings themselves. The real problem was her resistance to them, her fear of them, her endless struggle to make them go away. When she stopped fighting, the anxiety no longer had anything to push against. It became like a wave that rises and falls without destroying the shore. The Buddha's enlightenment came from this same insight. The forces that arose to challenge him were not external demons. They were the manifestations of his own mind, his own fears, his own desires, his own attachments. And he discovered that the way to freedom was not to conquer them but to embrace them. Not to destroy them but to understand them. Not to reject them but to accept them. This is the deepest meaning of self-acceptance. It is not about tolerating your difficult parts. It is about welcoming them home. It is about recognizing that every part of you, even the parts you most hate, even the parts you most fear, even the parts you have spent your life trying to cut away, every part of you belongs. Every part of you has something to teach you. Every part of you is longing for your attention, your compassion, your love. Think of the parts of yourself you have exiled. The anger you are ashamed of. The sadness you hide from others. The fear you pretend does not exist. The desire you judge as wrong. These are not your enemies. They are your children, crying out for your attention. They have been locked in the basement of your psyche, and they have been banging on the door for years. Your resistance to them has only made them louder. Your acceptance of them will finally let them rest. The Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree shows us the way. When the demons come, do not run. Do not fight. Do not try to distract yourself. Sit still. Look them in the eye. Say, I see you. I know you. You cannot harm me. And watch what happens. In the light of your accepting awareness, even the darkest demons begin to transform. They are not destroyed. They are integrated. They become not your enemies but your allies, not your weaknesses but your teachers. Let your breath become your gentle anchor, holding you steady in the present moment. We have been exploring the radical invitation of the Buddha, the invitation to stop fighting ourselves and to begin welcoming all parts of our being home. Today we encounter a teaching that can transform how we relate to the most painful experiences of our lives. The Buddha observed that human beings have a peculiar relationship with time. We spend enormous energy dwelling in the past, replaying old wounds, regretting things we cannot change. We spend even more energy worrying about the future, anticipating disasters that may never come, trying to control outcomes we cannot guarantee. And in this constant movement between past and future, we miss the only moment that ever truly exists, the present moment. This might sound simple, even obvious. But the Buddha saw that this habit of leaving the present moment is the very structure of suffering. When we are not fully here, we are not fully alive. When we are not fully here, we cannot accept what is, because we are too busy fighting what was or what might be. Let me share with you a story that illuminates this teaching. In a quiet town, there lived a man named Thomas who had lost his wife to illness 3 years earlier. They had been married for 40 years, and her loss had shattered him. Every day, Thomas would visit her grave. He would bring flowers, talk to her, tell her about his day. And every day, he would leave the cemetery feeling exactly the same, empty and aching. His daughter, Rachel, watched this with growing concern. She loved her father deeply and understood his grief, but she could see that he was not healing. He was stuck, caught in a loop of visiting the past without ever truly processing it. One afternoon, she decided to join him on his visit to the cemetery. After they had sat in silence for a while, Rachel gently said, "Dad, Mom has been gone for 3 years now. What do you think she would want for you?" Thomas looked at her, surprised. "She would want me to remember her. She would want me to honor her." "Yes," Rachel agreed. "But how would she want you to remember her? Would she want you to spend every day in a place of death? Or would she want you to carry her with you into the places of life?" Thomas had no answer. He looked at the grave, then at his daughter, then back at the grave. Rachel continued. "Mom was not this headstone. She was not this plot of ground. She was the woman who loved to cook Sunday dinners. She was the woman who laughed at your jokes even when they weren't funny. She was the woman who worried about us, who prayed for us, who wanted us to be happy. Where do those things live now?" Thomas thought for a long moment. "They live in me," he whispered. "They live in you. They live in all of us who loved her." Rachel nodded. "Then maybe it's time to stop visiting her here and start carrying her with you out there. Not forgetting her, but honoring her by living fully, by being present, by bringing her memory into the world of the living instead of keeping it trapped in the world of the dead." That day marked a turning point for Thomas. He did not stop loving his wife. He did not stop missing her. But he began to shift his relationship with his grief. Instead of returning again and again to the past, he began to bring the past with him into the present. He started cooking some of her favorite recipes. He told stories about her to his grandchildren. He planted a garden with the flowers she had loved. He was still grieving, but his grief was no longer a prison. It had become a bridge, connecting his past with his present, connecting his love for her with his life now. The Buddha taught that the past is like a dream. It is gone. It cannot be changed. The future is like a fantasy. It has not yet arrived. It cannot be controlled. The only moment over which we have any real influence is this one, right now. And in this moment, we have a choice. We can choose to be present. We can choose to accept what is. We can choose to respond to life as it actually is, rather than reacting to memories of what was or fears of what might be. This does not mean we should never think about the past or plan for the future. Of course we must. The past holds our memories, our lessons, our loved ones who have gone before us. The future holds our hopes, our dreams, our responsibilities. But the Buddha invites us to hold these lightly, to visit them without living in them, to learn from them without being trapped by them. Consider your own relationship with time. How much of your mental energy is spent in places that no longer exist or have not yet arrived? How much of your suffering comes from replaying old scenes, wishing you could go back and do things differently? How much comes from imagining future catastrophes, preparing for disasters that may never happen? This is the human condition, but it does not have to be your permanent condition. The practice the Buddha taught is simple, though not easy. When you find yourself lost in the past, gently bring yourself back to the present. Feel your breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Look at something in your immediate environment and really see it. When you find yourself worrying about the future, do the same. Come back to now. Come back to what is actually happening, not what happened or what might happen. In this coming back, something remarkable occurs. You begin to discover that the present moment, just as it is enough. It may not be perfect. It may contain pain, difficulty, uncertainty. But it is real. It is alive. It is the only place where you can actually live, actually love, actually change, actually accept yourself and your life exactly as they are. Thomas discovered that he could honor his wife not by living in the past, but by bringing her love into the present. You can honor your own life the same way. Not by escaping into what was or what might be, but by showing up fully for what is. This is self-acceptance in time. Accepting that this moment, with all its joys and all its sorrows, is your life. And it is enough. Allow yourself to settle deeply now, as if you were sinking into a warm, supportive embrace. The journey we have been taking together has been leading us toward a single, profound realization. Today we explore what may be the most practical and immediately applicable of all the Buddha's teachings, the teaching of loving kindness, or as it is known in the ancient language, metta. The Buddha taught that just as we train the body through exercise and the mind through meditation, we can train the heart through the intentional cultivation of kindness. But he made a surprising discovery. The first recipient of this kindness must be ourselves. This was revolutionary. In a culture that often emphasized self-denial and self-discipline, the Buddha pointed to self-compassion as the foundation of all genuine spiritual growth. Let me share with you a story that reveals why this matters so deeply. There was once a nurse named Patricia who had spent 30 years caring for others. She worked in a hospital, often taking the longest shifts, the most difficult patients, the assignments no one else wanted. At home, she cared for her aging mother, her grandchildren on weekends, her neighbors when they fell ill. Everyone knew Patricia as the person you could count on, the one who would drop everything to help. But Patricia had a secret. She was exhausted, depleted, running on empty. She gave and gave and gave, but she never received. More importantly, she never gave to herself. She believed that being a good person meant putting everyone else first. She believed that self-care was selfish. She believed that her own needs should wait until everyone else's were met, which of course, they never were. One day, Patricia collapsed at work. The doctors said it was exhaustion, burnout, her body finally refusing to continue. She was forced to take time off, forced to rest, forced to do nothing. And in that forced stillness, she discovered something painful. She did not know how to be kind to herself. She did not know how to receive. She did not know how to rest without guilt, how to nurture herself without feeling selfish. A friend, seeing her struggle, gave her a simple practice. Each morning, Patricia was to sit quietly and place her hand on her heart. She was to take 3 deep breaths and then say silently to herself, "May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease." At first, these words felt strange, almost wrong. They felt selfish. But Patricia persisted. Day after day, she would sit and offer these wishes to herself. And slowly, something began to shift. She noticed that she was sleeping a little better. She noticed that she was less irritable. She noticed that she had moments of genuine peace, moments when she was not worrying about someone else's needs. After several weeks, Patricia returned to work. She was still the caring nurse she had always been, but something was different. She now understood that her caring for others had to flow from a full well, not an empty one. She now understood that self-kindness was not selfishness. It was sustainability. It was the foundation that made all her giving possible. The Buddha taught that loving kindness is like a mother's love for her child. A mother does not love her child because the child is perfect. She loves her child because the child is hers. In the same way, we are invited to love ourselves not because we are perfect, but because we are ours. We are the only self we will ever have. We are the only consciousness that will ever experience this particular life. And we deserve our own kindness, not as a reward for good behavior, but as a birthright. Consider how you treat yourself when you make a mistake. Do you offer understanding or criticism? Do you offer comfort or punishment? Do you offer encouragement or shame? The Buddha invites us to notice these patterns and to gently begin changing them. Not through force, not through self-discipline, but through the simple, repeated practice of offering ourselves kindness. This practice of self-kindness is not about ignoring our faults or pretending we are perfect. It is about relating to our faults with compassion rather than contempt. When you notice something you do not like about yourself, you have two choices. You can attack yourself for it, which will likely make it worse. Or you can acknowledge it with kindness, which creates the safety and space for genuine change. Think of a child who is learning to walk. When the child falls, a loving parent does not shout, "You are so clumsy. What is wrong with you? Get up and do it right." The loving parent picks the child up, offers comfort, and encourages another try. We are all that child, learning to walk the difficult path of being human. And we all need that loving parent within, the voice that says, "It's okay. You fell. Everyone falls. Let's try again." This is the loving kindness the Buddha taught. It is not a soft, sentimental feeling. It is a courageous, disciplined practice of turning toward ourselves with the same unconditional positive regard we would offer a beloved child. It is the foundation of self-acceptance. Because only when we accept ourselves with kindness can we begin to change in ways that are genuine and lasting. Patricia learned that her years of caring for others had been, in a way, a form of running from herself. By focusing entirely on others, she had avoided facing her own needs, her own pain, her own longing for love. When she finally sat with herself and offered kindness, she was not being selfish. She was coming home. She was finally including herself in the circle of her own compassion. Breathe gently, allowing the teachings to settle deep within your consciousness. We have been exploring the path of self-acceptance from many angles, each revealing a different facet of this profound truth. Today we encounter a teaching that can transform our relationship with the most difficult emotions we face. The Buddha observed that human beings have a tendency to divide experience into two categories, pleasant and unpleasant. We cling to the pleasant, desperately trying to make it last. We push away the unpleasant, desperately trying to make it go away. And in this endless cycle of grasping and pushing, we exhaust ourselves. The Buddha's invitation was radically different. He invited us to relate to all experience, pleasant and unpleasant alike, with equanimity, with balance, with the steady awareness that knows all things pass. Let me share with you a story that illuminates this teaching. In a coastal village, there lived a fisherman named Hiroshi. He had been fishing these waters since childhood, and he knew the sea as well as anyone. But Hiroshi had a struggle. He hated storms. Whenever the weather turned rough, whenever the waves grew high and the wind fierce, he would become terrified. He would stay home, unable to work, unable to eat, unable to think of anything but the danger. One year, the storm season was particularly severe. Week after week, the weather kept Hiroshi from his work. His savings dwindled. His fear grew. He became desperate, not just about the storms, but about his own inability to cope with them. Finally, in his desperation, he went to see an old woman who lived in the hills above the village. She was known as a wise woman, someone who understood the ways of the heart and the sea. Hiroshi poured out his story, his fear of storms, his helplessness, his shame at being unable to work while other fishermen found ways to manage. The old woman listened without speaking. When he finished, she pointed to the window. "Do you see that tree outside?" Hiroshi looked. It was an old olive tree, gnarled and twisted, its branches reaching in every direction. "I see it," he said. "Watch it for a moment," the old woman instructed. "Feel the wind blowing. See how the tree moves with it." Hiroshi watched. The wind was strong that day, and the tree swayed and bent, its branches dancing wildly. "Now imagine a different tree," the old woman continued. "Imagine a tree that refused to move. Imagine a tree that stood rigid and unbending against the wind. What would happen to that tree?" Hiroshi thought for a moment. "It would break," he said quietly. "Yes," the old woman nodded. "The tree that survives the storms is not the strongest tree. It is the most flexible tree. It is the tree that knows how to bend. The tree does not fight the wind. It accepts the wind. It moves with the wind. And when the wind passes, it returns to its natural position, unharmed." She looked at Hiroshi with kind eyes. "You have been trying to be the rigid tree. You have been fighting the storms of your fear, trying to make them stop, trying to be strong enough to resist them. But fear is like the wind. It comes and it goes. You cannot stop it. You can only learn to bend with it, to move with it, to accept it without being broken by it." This teaching transformed Hiroshi's relationship with his fear. He did not suddenly become fearless. The storm still came, and the fear still arose. But instead of fighting it, instead of being paralyzed by it, he learned to bend. He learned to acknowledge the fear, to breathe with it, to let it move through him without taking over. And in that bending, he discovered something remarkable. The fear lost its power over him. It was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He could feel it and still function, still make decisions, still live his life. The Buddha's teaching of equanimity is exactly this wisdom of the flexible tree. It is not about becoming numb or indifferent to life. It is about developing the capacity to be with whatever arises without being overthrown by it. Joy arises, and we enjoy it fully, knowing it will pass. Sorrow arises, and we feel it fully, knowing it will pass. Fear arises, and we acknowledge it fully, knowing it will pass. We remain rooted in awareness while all experiences, pleasant and unpleasant, come and go like weather. This is a profound form of self-acceptance. It is accepting not just ourselves, but the entire flow of our experience. It is accepting that life will always bring both pleasure and pain, both gain and loss, both praise and blame. It is accepting that we cannot control what arises, but we can control how we relate to what arises. We can learn to bend rather than break. Consider your own relationship with difficult emotions. When fear arises, do you fight it? When sadness comes, do you push it away? When anger appears, do you judge yourself for it? The practice of equanimity invites you to do something different. It invites you to pause, to breathe, and to say silently, this too belongs. This too will pass. The flexible tree teaches us that strength is not rigidity. True strength is the capacity to remain rooted while allowing ourselves to move with whatever winds may come. It is the capacity to accept the full range of our humanity without losing our center. It is the capacity to say yes to life, not just to the parts we like, but to the whole of it. Hiroshi became a different fisherman after his conversation with the old woman. He still felt fear when storms came, but he no longer hated himself for it. He no longer saw his fear as a weakness. He saw it as a natural response, a wave in the ocean of his experience. And because he no longer fought it, he could work through it. He could go out in conditions that previously would have kept him home. He was not fearless. He was flexible. And flexibility, the Buddha taught, is the secret to surviving every storm life sends our way. Let your breath be your companion now, steady and calm, as we gather the teachings we have explored and bring them home to your heart. We began with the ocean and its waves, discovering that you are not your thoughts but the awareness in which thoughts arise. We contemplated the restored painting, understanding that your true nature has never been damaged, only covered over. We sat with the potter's vase, learning that imperfections are not flaws but signatures of the real. We explored the musician who lost his cello and found himself, realizing that no fixed identity can capture the fullness of who you are. We witnessed Catherine befriend her anxiety and the Buddha welcome his demons, understanding that what we resist persists and what we accept transforms. We walked with Thomas from the cemetery into the present moment, learning that life is lived only now. We sat with Patricia as she learned to offer herself the kindness she gave so freely to others. We watched Hiroshi's tree bend in the wind, discovering that flexibility is the deepest strength. All of these stories point to one truth. The change you seek, the peace you long for, the freedom you imagine exists somewhere in the future, is available to you now. Not through becoming someone else, but through fully accepting who you already are. Not through fighting yourself, but through embracing yourself. Not through escaping your humanity, but through entering it more completely. The Buddha's awakening was not the attainment of something new. It was the full acceptance of what had always been true. And this same awakening is available to you, not in some distant future, but in this very moment. Right now, beneath all thoughts, beneath all feelings, beneath all identities, the vast ocean of your awareness remains untouched, luminous, and free. You have never been separate from it. You have only forgotten. So as you go from this place, carry these teachings gently. When you stumble, as you will, do not add the second arrow of self-judgment. Simply notice, breathe, and begin again. When you encounter the parts of yourself you least want to see, do not turn away. Turn toward them with the same compassion you would offer a beloved friend. When the storms of life arise, do not fight them. Bend like the tree, rooted in awareness, flexible in experience. This is the path. This is the practice. This is the peace that has always been yours. Thank you for walking this path with me. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. This is the blessing of Monk's Temple. Until we meet again.